38 years ago, a 17-year-old girl in Spearfish vanished on her way home from work, disappearing without a trace, leaving her family shattered and the community gripped by fear that lingered for decades. Authorities suspected a group of local young men who had been seen in the area that night, but with no body found and only scant clues to follow, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet through all those years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile belief that her daughter was still out there somewhere and the truth was simply hidden. Then one day, when the old case file was reopened, investigators uncovered a crucial detail that everyone had previously overlooked. A detail powerful enough to turn the entire case upside down and shock everyone involved in a way no one could have foreseen. Before we dive deep into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. In late fall of 1987, Spearfish lay beneath a pale gray sky as the first cold winds of the season swept down from the Black Hills and across the small streets. The town was left with only the sound of wind threading through rooftops and the faint creak of metal signs swaying in the gusts. Weak yellow streetlights spilled onto the dark asphalt, casting patchy shadows from the bare skeletal trees lining the roads. It was the kind of night when everything shut down early, every house sealed its windows against the chill, and Spearfish's silence grew so complete that even a car far away echoed as if it were right in front of the porch. 17-year-old Kara Lindstrom finished her evening shift at Dakota Mart and left the store as the clock neared the end of the night. She threw on her jacket, walked around the parking lot, and started down the familiar road home. Beneath a thin layer of mist, the street sloped gently, flanked by the backyards of small houses in a row. Tree shadows stretched long and shifted slightly in the wind, while the old wooden fence behind the Lindstrom house leaned in the dim light. When she pushed open the back door and stepped inside, Kara paused for a moment and told her mother she had felt someone standing near the fence as she crossed the yard. It wasn't a clear figure, just an undefined presence that made her uneasy. Her mother looked out the kitchen window, but saw only thick darkness, no movement except the gentle swaying of the trees. She figured it was probably just the dark and the heavy mist. Kara didn't say anything more and went straight to her room. She closed the door, and the house returned to its usual quiet rhythm. A little while later, her mother called Kara from the kitchen, but got no answer. She went upstairs, knocked, and the door drifted open to an empty room. No footsteps, no sign that Kara had just left or taken anything with her. Her mother checked the living room, the bathroom, then went out to the backyard. The back door was ajar, the curtain fluttering lightly in the breeze, as if someone had just passed through. The yard was silent, no movement, no voices, no sign of Kara nearby. The family began searching the entire property, along the fence, out to the front street, and knocked on neighbors' doors for help. People fanned out across the yard, under the trees, along the strip of land behind the house, but found no trace that Kara had only just been there moments ago. As time passed with no new clues, panic in the house rose fast. After searching every possible spot nearby, the family realized they had no reasonable explanation for Kara's sudden disappearance. No footprints, no sign she had left on her own, no sounds or calls. At that point, they knew Kara was missing and immediately called the police. The missing person call came into the Spearfish Police Department, dispatched late that night, and within minutes a patrol unit was sent to the Lindstrom home. The police car pulled up in front of the house as cold wind whipped down the empty street, red and blue lights reflecting off the back wall. Two officers stepped inside and asked the family to recount everything from the moment Kara came home after work until they could no longer find her. The family repeated every detail: the time Kara walked in, her comment about seeing a shadow by the fence, the moment they got no reply when calling upstairs, the back door left ajar, and her complete disappearance in such a short window of time. The police wrote everything down and compared it with the estimated time Kara had been inside the house. They began examining the scene on the spot. Kara's room was untouched, nothing disturbed. The kitchen and living room showed no signs of a struggle. The back door was open wide enough for a person to walk through, but the floor had no marks of an intruder or anything dropped. The initial observations yielded no concrete clues and no physical evidence to support any particular theory. Because this was a missing teenager, Spearfish PD followed 1980s protocol and sealed off the area around the house. Temporary boundaries were set, neighbors were kept from the backyard, and the family was asked not to move anything until investigators arrived. They checked every entry point, noted the condition of windows and locks, examined the backyard, and weighed the plausibility of each possibility, whether Kara left voluntarily without telling anyone, whether someone lured her away quietly, or whether an outsider intervened without leaving obvious traces. Comparing the last moment family members saw Kara with the moment they realized she was gone, narrowed the window to a very short period, creating a time frame in which any departure, voluntary or not, had happened faster than normal. The lead officer kept asking about Kara's habits, recent contacts, school, and work schedule, but nothing immediately explained her leaving unnoticed. In the cold night, with the neighborhood silent and a young woman vanishing just minutes after walking through her own door, police decided a wider scene examination would have to wait until morning with more manpower. For now, all they had were the initial statements and a house that showed no clear signs of either voluntary departure or forced abduction. Spearfish PD logged the case as a missing person and began the investigation using the most viable procedures available at the time. Immediately after finishing the initial interview with the Lindstrom family, Spearfish PD officers expanded their canvass to neighboring houses and the surrounding area for any detail that might shed light on Kara's disappearance. This was critical since there was no clear physical evidence inside the home, and the window of her disappearance was so narrow, forcing police to rely heavily on whatever scattered observations local residents might have made. They went door to door along the main road and around to the back where the long wooden fence bordered the yard Kara had mentioned before vanishing. The team focused first on homes with a direct view of the Lindstrom backyard. An elderly couple next door said they had heard a few unusual sounds around the time it was fully dark. The husband said he vaguely heard what sounded like footsteps or crunching leaves coming from the direction of the back fence, but he didn't turn on a light to check, thinking it might be wildlife or branches moving in the wind. His wife agreed but added that a few minutes before the noises, she had felt someone walk past their living room window, though she couldn't make out a person or any details. These observations weren't precise enough to pinpoint timing or identify anyone, but they supported the possibility of a person or strange movement in the area right before Kara disappeared. The team moved to the house across the alley, where a middle-aged woman lived with her 2 young children. She said that shortly before Spearfish PD arrived, she had seen a figure moving close to the fence, in almost exactly the spot Kara had described to her mother. She couldn't see a face or clothing because of the thick darkness, but she remembered the person stood there long enough to catch her attention. When police pressed for more, she described the movement as less like someone just passing by and more like someone watching, then moving off toward the side street. This was significant because it matched the time frame when Kara was home and corroborated the idea that someone had been in the backyard area. Still, she couldn't determine gender, height, clothing, or any specific features. A few houses down, a truck driver said he saw a dark green Jeep driving slower than normal through the neighborhood on the evening Kara went missing. The vehicle was running with only parking lights, not headlights, crawling along the street before turning toward the Lindstrom's block. He couldn't recall the license plate because it was dark, but he stressed this wasn't a car regularly seen in the area. He described a quieter, older-sounding engine and said the driver appeared to be scanning both sides of the street rather than just passing through. This detail was carefully noted because it could indicate stalking or waiting for the right moment to approach the backyard. Police continued collecting statements from a few more homes at the end of the street, but most were fragmented. One person heard a car door close but didn't catch the vehicle. Another heard a dog barking toward the Lindstrom backyard but saw nothing specific. A teenager next door thought he saw a small glint like metal reflecting near the alley, but wasn't sure because he was upstairs looking through curtains. All these statements were vague, yet each piece helped paint a broader picture of suspicious activity around the Lindstrom home during the exact window Kara was there. When preliminarily compiled, Spearfish PD noted 3 standout clusters of information, 1 unusual sounds, and the presence of a person or movement near the back fence, right before Kara vanished. 2 at least 1 witness seeing a figure moving along the fence in a way that matched what Kara had told her mother. 3 the appearance of a dark green Jeep driving slowly through the area, inconsistent with regular neighborhood traffic. Though nothing was conclusive yet, these statements laid the initial groundwork for police to start considering the strong possibility that a stranger approached the house the night Kara disappeared. At this stage, however, everything remained disconnected fragments, and Spearfish PD had to keep exploring other avenues to avoid missing any explanation for a young woman vanishing just minutes after walking through her own door. Right after compiling the neighbor statements, Spearfish PD shifted focus to establishing Kara's final movements before the family reported her missing, treating this as essential to piecing together what happened from the moment she left work until she entered the house. Police started at Dakota Mart, where Kara had ended her evening shift. The store manager confirmed she clocked out on schedule, showed no signs of tiredness or distraction, and left after checking the shift log. A coworker on the same shift said Kara always walked home via the path behind the parking lot because it was shorter, even though it was deserted and poorly lit at night. Employees were asked about anyone present while Kara was getting ready to leave. One cashier remembered that about 10 minutes before Kara walked out, a young man had been hanging around the service counter, asking unimportant questions, then leaning against a shelf and looking around. He didn't buy anything and left right after checking his watch, before Kara even exited. Another employee saw the same man pause briefly near the entrance, as if waiting for someone or watching a specific person. No one in the store recognized him as a regular customer or local resident. When pressed further, one employee was certain she saw Kara exchange a short sentence with the man before heading outside, but because of the distance and store noise, no one heard what was said. She only recalled that Kara didn't look worried or upset, and didn't stop to talk long. She went straight to the parking lot. This was important because it aligned with Kara later feeling followed near the fence, raising the possibility someone had approached her before she even left the store. To firm up the timeline, Spearfish PD reviewed Dakota Mart's VHS security system, knowing the nighttime quality was poor. The store had only one camera inside pointing toward the main doors, recording at low speed. In the footage police obtained, Kara's figure briefly appeared as she left, but the outside parking lot was almost invisible, only faint car lights in the distance, and a shadowy figure moving in the dark at the very edge of the frame. The person's face or clothing couldn't be made out, but their location matched the path Kara normally walked home. Police time-stamped the tape using the store's clock, establishing exactly when Kara left Dakota Mart and which direction she took. At the same time, they mapped her walking route from the back of Dakota Mart, across the large parking lot, through a narrow path between 2 rows of old warehouses, then onto the residential street leading to the Lindstrom house. That route had only a few dim streetlights, plenty of dark patches, and low wooden fences, matching the area where Kara sensed someone watching. By cross-referencing her clock-out time, the camera timestamp, and the estimated walking distance home, police solidly reconstructed Kara's final known movements in the period before she vanished. The information from employees about the strange man, combined with the shadowy figure on the edge of the parking lot footage, helped Spearfish PD narrow both the time and space where contact between Kara and another individual could have occurred, though it still wasn't enough to determine the nature of that contact. Establishing a clear route and precise timeline became the foundation for continuing to evaluate the suspicious signs around the Lindstrom home, and for confirming the strong likelihood that Kara had been followed from the moment she left the store until she stepped into her own private space on the night she disappeared. After finalizing the establishment of Kara's final route and recording all statements from the surrounding area, Spearfish PD returned their focus to the Lindstrom house to conduct the first systematic and more detailed crime scene examination. This step aimed to determine whether there were any signs that Kara had left the house voluntarily or had been taken by someone, because all the data up to that point revolved around the fact that she disappeared within a span of only minutes, a circumstance that required police to evaluate every small detail with extreme caution inside the confined space of the home. The officers began in Kara's room. The room was tidy, with no signs of disturbance. The bed was neatly made. Books and school materials were still in their proper places on the desk. The desk lamp was off. The window was closed, and the curtains were half drawn. This was the normal state according to the mother's statement, meaning Kara showed no signs of packing to leave. There were no indications of haste or items being taken. On the floor there were no drag marks, no extra dust footprints, or anything suggesting a struggle had occurred. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, exactly as the mother had found it, with no evidence of it being forcefully pushed or kicked. Leaving Kara's room, police moved to check the hallway leading toward the kitchen. The hallway was narrow with old carpeting. The carpet was not shifted or bearing strange shoe prints, only the normal traces of family use. The walls showed no scratches or chipped paint, and no objects had fallen. From the hallway looking toward the kitchen, the overall picture of the house still reflected an intact space, with no evidence of violence or unusual movement. In the kitchen area, officers noted the smell of cold air blowing in from the back door. The kitchen door was slightly open. The hinges were not bent, the lock was not broken, and the glass was intact. The fabric curtain next to the door swayed gently with each gust of wind, consistent with the mother's earlier description when she discovered Kara was missing. The kitchen counter was neat. Pots, pans, dishes, and cups were undisturbed. Nothing had fallen to the floor. The kitchen floor was clean, with no muddy footprints, strange shoe marks or skid marks. On the wooden surface near the door, there were no unusual handprints or signs of forceful use. Police paid special attention to the space between the back door and the hallway entrance, as this was the area Kara most likely passed through or was led through, given the description of the open back door. However, the floor surface provided no clear signals, no fingernail scratches, no small items like jewelry or accessories left behind, no signs of chairs or tables being shoved. The backyard visible from the kitchen door was simply a dark, quiet space. The constant cold wind blowing in made it likely that any small traces, if they had ever existed, would have been difficult to preserve. Police continued with a thorough examination of the back door itself. The lock was not broken and showed no pry marks. The hinges showed no signs of being forced. This virtually ruled out the hypothesis of a violent break-in almost immediately. However, the possibility that the door had not been properly locked, or that someone from outside had gently pulled it open, remained open. The problem was that nothing proved whether the person who opened the door was Kara or someone else. The evaluation of the indoor scene showed that Kara's disappearance was not accompanied by signs of a struggle or resistance. This forced police to consider several possibilities. Kara opened the door and went outside on her own. Kara heard something and stepped into the backyard, or someone called to her and led her out of the house without making noise, or persuaded her to leave in a way that left no disturbance in her room or the kitchen area. However, to confirm any of these hypotheses, police needed more information because the house yielded no clear physical evidence. The absence of physical evidence inside the home had two implications. It indicated no violence had occurred indoors, but it also limited the ability to determine direction of movement or point of access. When cross-referenced with neighbor statements and the timeline of Kara entering the house only minutes earlier, police found the disappearance was so quick and so clean that they could not clearly distinguish between Kara leaving voluntarily and being led away in a way that drew no attention. The indoor scene did not answer that question, but it did show that whatever happened left no trace from the bedroom door all the way to the back door. After completing the indoor examination, Spearfish PD concluded that the house provided no specific physical evidence to determine the nature of the disappearance, only reinforcing the fact that Kara had left her living space silently, without resistance, and without leaving clear signs. This was the preliminary conclusion based on what could be observed within the limits of the examination at that time. Immediately after finishing the indoor crime scene examination, without obtaining any specific traces, Spearfish PD shifted to launching a wide-area search to determine the direction in which Kara might have left the house or been taken. This phase required more manpower, so in addition to the on-duty officers, the department mobilized the K-9 unit, several local rescue personnel familiar with the Black Hills terrain, and many volunteers living around Spearfish. The weather was still cold, and night fog persisted, limiting visibility, but they had to proceed as soon as possible to maximize the chances of finding fresh traces. The search teams were divided into multiple groups, fanning out in all directions from the Lindstrom backyard, first sweeping along the footpaths that connected the residential area to the small hiking trails leading up into the Black Hills. K-9 teams led several groups to detect any lingering scent, but the cold weather and strong wind significantly impaired the dog's tracking ability. Other groups were sent toward Crow Peak Road, an area with many open lots, tall grass, and small truck paths, commonly used to haul goods through the sparse forest. That area was vast and full of side trails, forcing teams to move slowly and section by section. Meanwhile, the Lawrence County Sheriff's helicopter was deployed to scan from above, using spotlights to illuminate clearings in the forest and unoccupied land. Although the technology at the time lacked infrared equipment or stabilized cameras like later years, aerial scanning still helped identify low-lying areas or spots that ground teams could not easily reach. After hours of searching, one team entered an open lot near the edge of Crow Peak Road, an area that dipped slightly and was partially obscured by wild bushes. There, they discovered a small piece of silver-gray duct tape stuck to low grass. Though the piece of tape was not large, it was fresh, not faded, and located in a spot inconsistent with ordinary household trash. A few meters away, a volunteer found a torn piece of a black glove made of the cheap work glove material commonly sold at hardware stores. The glove fragment showed no decomposition, indicating it had not been there long. These two discoveries lay within a relatively narrow arc, strengthening the likelihood that they were related to an event that occurred close to the time of Kara's disappearance. When the K-9 unit was brought back to the area, the dogs showed a mild reaction, not strong enough to determine a specific direction of travel, but sufficient to confirm that a person or object with an unfamiliar scent had passed through recently. When the team expanded the search another several dozen meters westward, an officer noticed tire tracks in the soft dirt at the junction between the open lot and the access road to Crow Peak Road. The tracks were not very deep but clear enough to identify a tread pattern with horizontal and diagonal grooves, typical of tires used on older Jeep models. The tracks ran in a direction from the trail into the lot and then curved back out, forming an arc rather than a long stop, suggesting the vehicle had entered, turned around in the clearing, and left quickly. Because the soil was soft and lightly blown by wind, the tracks were not perfect, but the search team still documented them and marked the location with reflective stakes. The three discoveries, the piece of duct tape, the black glove fragment, and the Jeep tire tracks, were all collected following Spearfish PD's standard 1987 evidence procedure, placed in paper evidence bags, labeled with date, time, exact location, and the name of the collecting officer, then transported back to the station for temporary storage. However, because technology at the time was not advanced enough, they could not perform immediate in-depth analysis. Fingerprint, DNA, or material comparison testing was beyond the capabilities of the local lab, and fiber, adhesive, or chemical residue analysis was done only at a very basic level. This meant that although police now had their first physical evidence, they still could not reach specific conclusions or directly link these items to Kara's disappearance. Nevertheless, compared to the completely trace-free house, the Crow Peak Road area provided important initial clues: the presence of unnatural objects, tire tracks, matching the description of a suspicious vehicle, and a patch of ground disturbed in the recent past. These elements were fully documented and forwarded to command for further evaluation, while search teams continued sweeping adjacent areas for any additional clues that might help narrow down what happened on the night Kara vanished. After securing the evidence from the open lot near Crow Peak Road, Spearfish PD began compiling all data obtained from witness statements and the locations of the discovered evidence to start identifying individuals who might be connected to Kara's disappearance. Scattered pieces of information from neighbors, Dakota Mart employees, and people living around the Crow Peak Road area were placed on an analysis board. A witness near the Lindstrom home reported seeing a figure moving along the fence line. Another heard footsteps on dry leaves. A man on the street saw a dark green Jeep driving slowly and appearing to watch the area. At the same time, the evidence found in the open lot, the duct tape fragment, black glove piece, and Jeep tire tracks, formed a chain of data that could be linked to prior stalking or approach of Kara. Although nothing was conclusive yet, police needed to identify individuals in the area who owned vehicles matching the description or who had a history of being near locations Kara frequented on the night of the incident. From this, an initial list of many individuals was screened based on 3 criteria: persons present around Dakota Mart during Kara's shift end time, persons seen near the Lindstrom residential area, and persons who owned or had access to a dark green Jeep, the vehicle mentioned most often in statements. After eliminating subjects who did not match time or location, Spearfish PD narrowed the list to 3 prominent names, each matching at least one critical factor in the file: Caleb Bauer, Shane Hargrove, and Rico Torres. Police began verifying each person's background according to priority. Caleb Bauer was the first name elevated because of his direct connection to Dakota Mart. Through employee statements, investigators confirmed Bauer was at the store on the evening Kara finished her shift and was seen standing near the area where she exited. He lived within a short radius of the Lindstrom home, worked seasonal jobs, and frequently changed residences within the Spearfish area. Records showed Caleb had prior citations for disorderly conduct and had associated with a group of young men who hung around the old neighborhood near Highway 10. Although he had no serious criminal record, his presence at the exact time Kara left Dakota Mart and the store employees' descriptions made him a person of interest. The second individual, Shane Hargrove, entered the list after police pulled Lawrence County records for registered Jeep CJ7 owners. Shane owned an older dark green Jeep that matched witness descriptions of the vehicle seen in Kara's neighborhood. Shane's record showed minor traffic violations, a citation for disturbing the peace, and residence near Crow Peak Road, where tire tracks matching older Jeep tires were found. Shane worked seasonally at a small lumber mill, often returned home late, and neighbors noted that his Jeep sometimes took routes that did not match his direct path from work to home. While these factors did not constitute proof, they fit the hypothesis that the slow-moving Jeep in the neighborhood on the night Kara disappeared could have been driven by Shane. The third person on the list, Rico Torres, had no direct connection to Kara on the day of the incident, but stood out due to geography and social ties. He frequently hung out with Shane Hargrove's close circle and had been seen multiple times at night in the Black Hills area. Rico lived alone in a temporary rental on the edge of town, worked odd jobs, and had a few police notes for bar fights. Several residents reported seeing Rico riding with Shane in the green Jeep, making him a potential associate if that vehicle played a role in Kara's disappearance. Rico's inclusion in the suspect pool was not because he was seen near Kara's house, but because he was part of the small social network revolving around the owner of the matching vehicle and was very familiar with the sparse forest terrain around Crow Peak Road, where the evidence was recovered. None of the 3 had enough evidence for charges, but each had enough for Spearfish PD to investigate further. When compiling their residence information, police noted that Caleb lived near routes Kara regularly walked, Shane lived close to where the evidence was found, and Rico moved frequently between areas and had strong social ties to Shane. Each suggested a separate possibility, but the convergence of 3 lines of information around one dark green Jeep caused the temporary file to focus on this trio. The suspect list was finalized and forwarded to command to prepare for the next verification steps, where each individual's background, daily habits and social connections would serve as the foundation for Spearfish PD to assess their level of involvement in Kara Lindstrom's unusual disappearance. After narrowing down 3 potential suspects and recognizing that the dark green Jeep was the key intersection in the statements, Spearfish PD moved to a complete review of all Jeep CJ7 vehicles registered in Lawrence County in 1987. This was necessary because witnesses not only saw the Jeep driving slowly through the neighborhood, but also described the sound of an older engine and the vehicle's unusual movement, which matched the tire tracks found in the lot near Crow Peak Road. First, police requested the Motor Vehicle Office to provide a full list of all circulating Jeep CJ7s, including owner information, year of manufacture, color, and registered address. The initial list contained nearly 80 matching vehicles, but after filtering by color and model year described by witnesses, the number dropped to 14. Of those, only 6 were the shade of green described as dark green or forest green. Spearfish PD further narrowed the list by cross-referencing the owner's residential areas and activity radius near the Lindstrom home and Crow Peak Road. 3 of the 6 belonged to owners living more than 20 miles away and had clear evidence proving they were not in Spearfish during the time Kara disappeared. Thus, only 3 dark green Jeep CJ7s remained in the critical area, matching the 2 movement paths relevant to the disappearance: the route from Dakota Mart to Kara's house and the open lot where evidence was found. Of these 3, the first belonged to Shane Hargrove, who was already on the suspect list due to owning the exact model and living near the evidence discovery site. Records showed Shane regularly used the Jeep in the evenings, sometimes with friends, and often drove through the Crow Peak Road area as a shortcut home. This information aligned with the tire tracks found in the lot, though it could not yet confirm he was there the night Kara vanished. The second vehicle belonged to an older man on the eastern edge of Spearfish. When police visited his home for verification, he stated his Jeep had a broken transmission and had been in his garage for the 2 weeks prior to Kara's disappearance. He provided repair receipts and neighbor confirmation, so police temporarily removed that vehicle from consideration. The third belonged to a person whose job required constant travel, but initial investigation showed he was in Rapid City the night Kara disappeared, confirmed by work timesheets. Thus, of the original 6 vehicles, only Shane Hargrove's Jeep remained under suspicion, solidifying his position on the primary list. However, because Dakota Mart employees described the man standing near Kara before she left as physically matching Caleb Bauer more than Shane, police continued expanding verification of Caleb's vehicle access. Initial records showed Caleb did not own any Jeep CJ7, but informal sources from his circle said he occasionally drove friends' Jeeps. When police followed up, one statement indicated Caleb had borrowed Shane's Jeep for a quick drive a few days before the disappearance, though there was no evidence he used it on the actual night of the incident. This raised the possibility that Caleb could have had access to a vehicle matching the description, even though he was not the registered owner. In parallel, Spearfish PD checked repair garages, public parking lots, and unregistered parking areas to see if any dark green Jeep CJ7 existed outside the official registration list. No new discoveries were made, but the tracing process gave police confidence that they had sufficiently narrowed the relevant vehicles for subsequent evaluation steps. When all data was compiled, Shane Hargrove's Jeep became the focal point because it was the only vehicle in the area that simultaneously matched both witness descriptions and the tire tracks found near Crow Peak Road. At the same time, the story of Caleb possibly borrowing the Jeep was added to the file because, if true, it opened the possibility that the vehicle could have been used by someone other than the registered owner. Tracing the dark green Jeep to this stage was not yet enough to confirm any individual's role, but it was a critical step for Spearfish PD to identify the group of vehicles most likely directly connected to the movement path of whoever approached or followed Kara during the hours she went missing. After successfully tracing the green Jeep and narrowing the list down to the 3 names most likely connected, Caleb Bauer, Shane Hargrove, and Rico Torres, the Spearfish Police Department moved into the phase of direct interrogations with each individual to determine their level of involvement in Kara's disappearance. This was a necessary step to cross-check personal statements against the data already gathered from witness accounts, physical evidence, and movement patterns, while also examining any inconsistencies that might reveal critical information. The first person brought in was Caleb Bauer, because he had been inside the Dakota Mart at the exact time Kara got off work and was described by a store employee as standing near the area where she exited. During questioning, Caleb remained calm but repeatedly insisted he had only stopped in to ask about a product and left immediately afterward. When police asked him to account for his whereabouts at the time Kara would have reached home, Caleb offered a rather vague alibi. He said he went back to his apartment and stayed there the whole time, but no one could confirm it. The roommate he mentioned said he himself had gone to bed early that night and wasn't sure whether Caleb was home or not. When asked about the store employee seeing him standing near Kara and appearing to wait for something, Caleb replied that he was just standing by the door checking the time and didn't notice the girl walking past. The vagueness of his alibi kept Caleb from being cleared as a suspect, yet even so, there was still no evidence placing him near the Lindstrom house during the window when Kara vanished. Next, the Spearfish PD brought in Shane Hargrove, the owner of the green Jeep that matched both the witness description and the tire tracks found on Crow Peak Road. Shane arrived at the station guarded and somewhat irritated about being questioned regarding his movements on the night Kara went missing. He claimed he had worked late at the lumber mill and then driven straight home on his usual route. However, when police pressed for specific times he left the mill, the exact route he took, and whether he had stopped anywhere near Crow Peak Road, Shane's story started to fall apart. At first he said he went straight home, but when confronted with a witness who saw a green Jeep driving slowly through the neighborhood near the Lindstroms, he changed his tune and said he might have taken a detour to avoid a sewer repair roadblock. The Spearfish PD confirmed there had been no sewer repairs that week. When asked if anyone had been with him in the vehicle that night, Shane first said he was always alone, then said he might have given a buddy a ride near downtown. When police asked for the friend's name, Shane hesitated and said he couldn't remember. The inconsistencies in Shane's account made him the second major focus, but police still lacked legal grounds to hold him. The final suspect brought in during this initial round of questioning was Rico Torres, who had a close social connection to Shane and had been seen riding with him in the green Jeep. Rico showed up at the station fairly relaxed, but once the detailed questions started, his statements quickly revealed multiple contradictions. Rico insisted he was not with Shane on the evening Kara disappeared and had not used Shane's Jeep at any point around that time. However, when police compared his statement to a witness who had seen the two of them together in the Jeep, both before and after the date Kara vanished, Rico claimed the witness must be mistaken, or that it could have been one of Shane's other friends. When asked about his own presence in the Crow Peak Road area during the week of the disappearance, Rico denied it, yet records from a bar near the Black Hills showed he had been in the vicinity the previous afternoon. The timeline contradictions made Rico's account unreliable, but still not strong enough to charge or detain him. When all the data from the 3 interrogations was compiled, the Spearfish PD noted that each suspect had something that didn't add up. Caleb had no verifiable alibi. Shane's travel route was inconsistent. Rico provided information that contradicted witness statements. However, at that point, there was no physical evidence, crime scene trace, or definitive testimony showing that any of the 3 had direct involvement in Kara's disappearance. None of them admitted to being in the right place at the right time to have approached Kara. There was no physical trace to match, no supporting evidence from the Lindstrom home, and no witness who saw a decisive act. Therefore, although none of the three could be removed from the suspect list, the Spearfish PD did not have sufficient legal grounds to detain any of them. The case had to continue in the direction of gathering additional data because the first round of interrogations had only raised more questions rather than providing clear answers. After the first round of interrogations yielded no clear progress, the Spearfish PD decided to conduct a second, expanded search, this time focusing more deeply on forested areas and hillsides that the previous search teams had been unable to thoroughly cover due to darkness and difficult terrain. This search was organized at first light, when natural daylight was better, and the K9 units had optimal scent conditions in the cool, still morning air. Officers, along with volunteers and local rescue personnel, split into multiple teams and fanned out along trails leading from Crow Peak Road up the western slope, where there were many rocky clearings and dense thickets. The Lawrence County helicopter continued aerial support to identify hidden paths or areas of compressed soil that might indicate a vehicle had stopped. The ground teams systematically worked each section according to the topographic map marked during the first search, but this time pushed farther into areas they had only skimmed before. While moving through the dense woods near Trail 3, the K9 units reacted more strongly than they had the previous day. Not enough to pinpoint an exact path, but enough to indicate that someone had passed through the area close to the time Kara disappeared. Beneath the layer of dry leaves, officers found several spots where the soil had been lightly disturbed and patches of grass pressed down, suggesting someone had stood or walked there. However, there were no clear footprints because of the hard ground and thick leaf cover. From that point, the search team pushed another 200 meters or so toward a small rock crevice situated between two slopes. This was a seldom visited spot, shielded from the main road by large tree canopies, perfect for someone to stop briefly without being seen. It was right at the edge of that crevice that an officer noticed a pale piece of fabric caught on a low branch. When he carefully pulled it free, they realized it was a small handkerchief, simply edged, off-white in color, with a worn corner and very faint embroidery. Kara's mother had previously mentioned that her daughter usually carried a handkerchief when she went to work, though she couldn't recall the exact pattern. The handkerchief was dusty and slightly damp, but not torn, indicating it hadn't been there very long. The team immediately marked the location with reflective stakes and called 2 more officers over to document the surrounding terrain in detail. There were no signs of a struggle, but a narrow footpath led out to a clearing near Crow Peak Road, where the previous search had recovered duct tape, a piece of glove, and the Jeep tire tracks. The proximity and location made the handkerchief the most significant piece of evidence recovered since Kara's disappearance. The item was collected following full protocol, placed in a clean paper bag, labeled with date, time, exact location, and the name of the collecting officer, then entered into temporary evidence storage. However, the Spearfish PD was well aware of the limitations of 1987. The handkerchief could not be tested for DNA the way it could today, because forensic DNA technology was still in its infancy. They could only document the fabric type, fiber condition, and visible identifying features. Confirming whether the handkerchief actually belonged to Kara depended entirely on family recognition or comparison with similar items in her room. In addition, the search team swept the area around the crevice for any further signs that someone had lingered there. They found a few small rocks displaced, possibly by footsteps or strong wind, but nothing definitive. Several low branches showed fresh breaks, indicating recent passage. When the information was logged, police marked the crevice area as a location potentially linked to the movements of whoever approached or led Kara that night, even though they could not yet determine exactly what had happened there. In daylight, the team also checked the compressed soil area the helicopter had spotted lower on the slope. There they found only flattened grass and a few darker soil patches, but everything was too vague for a firm conclusion. Still, discovering the handkerchief was more of a breakthrough than the earlier items. The duct tape and glove fragment, only suggested the presence of criminal activity, whereas the handkerchief, if it was indeed Kara's, represented a direct link to the victim. All recovered evidence was carefully cataloged and stored according to existing standards, even though the Spearfish PD knew the technological limits of 1987 prevented any detailed biological analysis that could strengthen their conclusions. After completing the second expanded search and recovering the handkerchief believed to belong to Kara, the Spearfish PD found itself directionless again, as the new leads still failed to produce a clear breakthrough. With mounting pressure from both the victim's family and the community, a side investigative thread, previously mentioned only in passing during early discussions, suddenly became the focus and shifted the entire case in an unwanted direction. Attention turned to Kara's ex-boyfriend, someone the police had not previously considered a primary suspect. The reason for this shift was not complicated. A younger officer on the team, drawing on limited experience, but influenced by common patterns seen in missing young person cases, suggested that romantic conflict or personal resentment could be the motive. When this idea was raised in a team meeting, it quickly gained support from a few others who felt most of the current leads lacked solidity. Kara's recent relationship with her ex had been described by her mother as distant, though there were no clear signs of conflict. That detail alone was enough to create a new investigative pivot, causing the team to temporarily set aside the original suspect pool of Caleb Bauer, Shane Hargrove, and Rico Torres, individuals who had looser but repeated connections in witness statements and matched the physical evidence. This change of focus wasted significant resources. Instead of expanding checks in the hillside areas and pursuing the suspects tied to the green Jeep, the Spearfish PD spent considerable time repeatedly questioning Kara's ex-boyfriend and his close friends. They asked over and over about his schedule on the day Kara disappeared, their most recent conversations, and any signs Kara was experiencing relationship conflict or planning to end things. Yet every statement they received was straightforward and consistent. The ex-boyfriend was not in Spearfish the night Kara vanished, confirmed by multiple independent witnesses. He also did not own a Jeep and had no connection to the Crow Peak Road area. Despite that, police continued digging in this direction, delaying checks of still unsearched forest areas. Beyond wasting interrogation time, the team conducted searches of the ex-boyfriend's home and workplace, finding no evidence related to Kara. Pursuing this angle exhausted both him and his family, while reducing overall investigative efficiency, as many officers were pulled from fieldwork duties. Meanwhile, key witnesses who had reported seeing the green Jeep driving slowly or a figure near the fence were not re-interviewed. A man living near Crow Peak Road, who had stated he saw vehicle headlights shining down the trail the night Kara disappeared, should have been questioned again about exact timing and direction of travel, but that follow-up was shelved while police fixated on Kara's personal relationships. Another witness, the woman who saw a figure standing close to the fence, was never asked in depth about height, movement, or recognizable posture. Those details, even if vague, could have narrowed or eliminated certain suspects, but they were downplayed while the team poured attention into the romantic angle. This misdirection caused the case to rapidly lose momentum. With each passing day without answers, the gap between Kara's disappearance and the time police needed fresh traces widened, reducing the chances of recovering environmental evidence or reliable witness recall. The Jeep tire tracks were highly likely eroded by wind, rain, and animal activity. Compressed soil areas could have returned to normal. Scent trails for the K9 units lost accuracy over time. Moreover, because resources were spread to unrelated avenues, deep forest zones that should have been searched in the critical first days became harder to access as South Dakota weather turned colder and wetter, further hampering efforts. Inside the Spearfish PD, differences of opinion among officers began to surface. Some believed the investigation was veering away from hard facts. The Jeep sightings, physical evidence at Crow Peak Road, and Kara's walking route, while others wanted to keep exploring the romantic motive, convinced it might be the personal motive they were missing. This simmering disagreement, slowed down collective decisions and made them less decisive. When everything was reviewed after days spent chasing the wrong lead, the Spearfish PD had to admit there was no element linking Kara's ex-boyfriend to her disappearance. His answers were consistent, backed by witnesses, and showed no contradictions in timing or location. However, the price paid for reaching that conclusion was the loss of precious time, investigative momentum, and the optimal windows for gathering field evidence. After the investigation veered off course and weeks passed without any significant progress, the Spearfish Police Department was forced to confront the reality that the disappearance of Kara Lindstrom was gradually sliding into a dead end. The initial clues, the piece of duct tape, the fragment of a black glove, the Jeep tire tracks, and the handkerchief found on the hillside, all turned out to be evidence without clear identifying marks, untraceable to any source, and most critically, not directly linked to any individual. There was no body to determine the mechanism of death or extent of injury, no DNA to match against suspects, no murder weapon, no usable fingerprints, and no surveillance cameras capturing the moment Kara vanished. In the context of 1987, when forensic technology was still primitive and incapable of deeply analyzing biological traces, the collected evidence only hinted at behavior but was insufficient to prove anything. The original suspect pool, Caleb Bauer, Shane Hargrove, and Rico Torres, each had suspicious elements, yet none had direct incriminating evidence. Caleb had been at Dakota Mart, but his alibi did not prove he was at the scene at the exact time Kara disappeared. Shane owned a green Jeep that matched the witness description and tire tracks, but there was no proof his vehicle was on Crow Peak Road the night of the incident. Rico had a close social connection to Shane and was in the forest area near the time of the disappearance. But his statements, though contradictory, were not enough to establish a specific role in the case. None of the three had ever been seen directly with Kara on the night she went missing, nor had any of them left physical traces at the scene. Every clue pointed to different possibilities, but none carried enough legal weight to support prosecution or detention. Meanwhile, pressure from the community grew heavier. Local media occasionally brought up the case, demanding updates, but police had nothing new to offer. Kara's family kept asking for progress, yet Spearfish PD could only say they were still expanding the search and following new leads, even though in reality, efforts had clearly lost momentum. The earlier diversion of resources into wrong investigative directions had cost the task force valuable time before returning to reevaluate the original suspects. By the time they went back to the evidence at Crow Peak Road, many natural traces had completely vanished, tire tracks were washed away by weather, the ground was reclaimed by forest growth, and any scent trails for K9 units were essentially useless. Critical opportunities in the early phase had not been seized in time. This situation left the entire file heavy, hard to navigate, and lacking solid footing. The officer in charge repeatedly requested expanded searches, but after nearly 2 years with no new discoveries, the local budget could no longer sustain funding for a case, showing no progress. In the first weeks of 1990, Spearfish PD held a final comprehensive meeting to review the entire file, statements, and evidence. The conclusion was clear. There was no basis to arrest any suspect, no evidence proving criminal conduct, no confirmation whether Kara was alive or dead, and no body to open a homicide investigation. With every investigative avenue leading to a dead end, Spearfish PD was forced to make the decision they least wanted: suspend active investigation and move the case to pending status. By spring 1990, Kara Lindstrom's missing person file was officially closed and classified as a cold case under case number 87 CR 241. A case that had once mobilized significant resources in its early days would now only be revisited if new tips emerged from the community or if future forensic technology allowed reanalysis of the evidence. This decision left a huge void in the hearts of the Lindstrom family and the Spearfish community. As the file was moved to storage alongside hundreds of other unsolved cases in the county, Kara's disappearance became a lingering question without an answer or closure. With no new signs appearing, the Kara Lindstrom case entered its third year without progress and sank completely into silence, carrying with it the lasting disappointment, confusion, and sense of helplessness of the entire investigative team, marking the total impasse of one of the most baffling missing person cases Spearfish PD had ever faced. In 2015, nearly 3 decades after Kara Lindstrom vanished and Case 87-CR-241 was placed on the cold case list, the Cold Case Unit in Pierre launched a state-directed program to review old cases and assess which files could benefit from modern forensic technology. While examining hundreds of unsolved cases, Kara Lindstrom's name appeared on the priority list because it was one of the rare missing person cases accompanied by physical evidence recovered from the scene that had never been tested with new generation DNA techniques. When the team opened the storage cabinet and turned the yellowed pages of the old reports, they found that the case was documented quite thoroughly by 1980s standards: witness statements, scene reports, route maps, the original suspect list, and most importantly, the evidence inventory that included the piece of duct tape found at Crow Peak Road, the torn black glove fragment, and the handkerchief discovered near a rock crevice on the hillside. These 3 items had been preserved by Spearfish PD under the standard conditions of the time, sealed in paper bags, and stored first in the county evidence room before being transferred to state archives. The Cold Case Unit noted that in 1987, biological testing technology was far too limited to analyze any organic traces on these items. By 2015, however, DNA testing methods had advanced dramatically. STR analysis, mixed DNA profiling, ultramicroepithelial cell separation, and trace recovery techniques had all become routine. Retesting the old samples could now yield results that were impossible in 1987. Recognizing this potential, the review team began checking the integrity of the seals. The bag containing the duct tape was intact with no signs of having been opened. The glove fragment was carefully stored, though slightly frayed at the edges. The handkerchief still retained its fabric structure and showed no mold or moisture damage. Preliminary inspection confirmed that all 3 items were in good enough condition to be sent for modern analysis. While reviewing the old file, investigators also noted relevant details: the time and location where each item was found, their relationship to the Jeep tire tracks, and the fact that the items were scattered along a route a perpetrator might have taken. When all the data was systematized, the Cold Case Unit realized that among dozens of cold cases, 87-CR-241 was one of the few where potentially viable evidence remained intact and undamaged. This caused Kara's file to be flagged as a strong candidate for DNA re-examination, opening the door to clarifying points that had stumped Spearfish PD in 1987. At an internal meeting, the Cold Case Unit leader assessed that despite the absence of a body, usable fingerprints, or direct witnesses, the presence of interactive physical evidence, duct tape that might contain skin cells, a glove that could hold mixed DNA, and a handkerchief that might bear fabric traces belonging to Kara or someone else, created ideal conditions for modern testing. Re-examination would not only identify who had touched these items, but could also reconstruct the sequence of actions of whoever approached Kara or the area where she disappeared. This potential led the team to select the Kara Lindstrom case as one of the first files to be reopened in 2015. After a complete review, the Cold Case Unit formally drafted a request to reopen file 87-CR-241, including the list of items to be analyzed and the justification. The request was approved the same month. The evidence was removed from storage, final seal checks were performed, and the items were quickly transferred to the State Forensic Laboratory to begin testing under modern standards. This re-examination was seen as the first step in reviving a case that had lain dormant for 28 years, offering hope that what had been missed in 1987 could now be revealed by 2015 science. Upon receipt, the 3 items, the piece of duct tape, the black glove fragment, and the handkerchief were first examined by technicians for preservation condition before deep analysis began. All remained sealed, showed no cross-contamination, and retained sufficient physical integrity for testing. Forensic technicians prioritized the duct tape because its adhesive surface often trapped skin cells if it contacted bare skin. With modern STR-DNA technology, even a tiny amount of cellular material could be extracted and profiled. Under the microscope, they identified suspicious spots where human cells were trapped in the adhesive. After chemical cell lysis processing, technicians isolated DNA, amplified it via PCR, and compared it to the state database. The STR results showed the DNA did not belong to Kara and did not match any criminal DNA profiles on file, but crucially, it confirmed the duct tape had been handled by an unknown person unrelated to the Lindstrom family. Though the individual remained unidentified, the presence of foreign DNA on the item was a strong signal that the duct tape was directly connected to whoever approached Kara at the time of her disappearance. The second item analyzed was the black glove fragment. This was more complex than the duct tape because fabric often contains mixed DNA from sweat, skin cells, dust, or environmental material. The lab used mixed DNA separation techniques and specialized software to deconvolute the components. When analysis was complete, one individual's DNA profile stood out clearly from the mixture and was identified by the system. The result matched the DNA of Rico Torres, who had been on the 1987 suspect list but lacked concrete evidence for charges. The presence of Rico's DNA on the glove, found in an area believed to lie along the perpetrator's route, was a breakthrough discovery. It did not prove Rico had direct contact with Kara, but it was the first physical evidence linking a suspect to the critical location in the disappearance. Following DNA analysis, the glove underwent soil analysis. Forensic experts compared mineral composition, moisture, color, and particle makeup with soil samples collected from Crow Peak Road during the 1987 investigation. Although the reference samples were old, 2015 soil analysis accuracy far exceeded earlier capabilities. Results showed the soil on the glove matched the characteristics of Crow Peak Road soil, including granite fragments, sparse forest organic residue, and the fine dust typical of the dirt access road leading to where the duct tape was recovered. This strengthened the likelihood that the glove fragment had been used or dropped within the exact area the perpetrator traveled. The third item, the handkerchief, was subjected to fiber analysis to determine fabric type, origin, and compatibility with items belonging to the victim. When fibers from the handkerchief were compared to fabric samples from Kara's clothing provided by the family, the lab found identical weave structure, color, and fiber type. While not 100% conclusive without direct DNA, the match was highly significant. It indicated the handkerchief most likely belonged to Kara or had been carried by her. Its discovery location in a rock crevice along the route from the Lindstrom home to Crow Peak Road also aligned with the direction police believed the perpetrator had taken Kara. Taken together, the three results painted a far clearer picture than Spearfish PD had in 1987. Duct tape bearing non-family DNA, a glove containing a mixture that included Rico Torres DNA, with soil matching Crow Peak Road from the night of the disappearance, and handkerchief fibers consistent with Kara's clothing, strongly suggesting the item was hers and directly related to her. What drew the forensic technician's attention most was the intersection of the evidence. The duct tape and glove were found in the same forest area, while the handkerchief was recovered nearby. Rico's DNA appeared on the second item, and fiber analysis tied the third item to the victim. Although each result alone was not conclusive, together they formed a spatio-temporal chain of data. This was the kind of evidence Spearfish PD never had before. With advances in testing technology, the scattered dots of 1987 now connected into a logical sequence. One or more individuals were present at Crow Peak Road at the time of Kara's disappearance. One of them left DNA matching Rico Torres, and a handkerchief, Almost certainly Kara's had been dropped or discarded where the other evidence was found. These findings were strong enough for the cold case unit to conclude that File 87 CR 241 was no longer hopeless and fully merited a modern reinvestigation. What 1987 technology could not achieve had now happened for the first time in nearly 30 years. The Kara Lindstrom case showed signs of being unlocked. Once the forensic reports were returned, the cold case unit decided to bring Rico Torres back in to compare his old statements against the new evidence, particularly the fact that his DNA was on the glove fragment recovered at Crow Peak Road. When notified of the interview, Torres expressed displeasure and insisted he had already told everything in 1987. But when he arrived at the interrogation room, his demeanor changed noticeably upon seeing the new case file and photographs of the evidence analyzed with modern technology. Investigators began by showing him his original 1987 statement, in which he completely denied being near the Black Hills Forest or Crow Peak Road on the day Kara disappeared. He had previously claimed witnesses who saw him and Shane in the Jeep were mistaken, and that he never used the Jeep at any time close to the incident. This time, however, investigators immediately placed the DNA deconvolution report on the table, showing that the dominant DNA profile on the glove had a significant match with Torres. Upon seeing the document, Torres fell silent for a long time, then said he could not remember everything clearly because so many years had passed. When shown photographs of the glove's discovery location and told that the soil on it matched Crow Peak Road samples, Torres began to waver. He tried to explain that the glove did not necessarily belong to him because he used to lend things to lots of people. But when asked to name specific individuals who had borrowed his gloves, his answers became vague and unconvincing. Investigators continued to press, emphasizing that the handkerchief found nearby was highly likely Kara's and that a glove bearing Torres' DNA appearing in the same area could not be coincidence. Torres' attitude began to shift. His voice slowed, he avoided eye contact, and he showed clear signs of stress. Under the weight of the evidence, he admitted he had been in the forest that night, but still offered a vague reason. He said he was just riding along with Shane because Shane wanted to drive up there to clear his head. This directly contradicted his 1987 statement, in which he had completely denied being on Crow Peak Road. When reminded that he had previously said he never left Spearfish that night, Torres replied that he remembered wrong because he had been too panicked at the time. This shift showed he was beginning to adjust his story to fit the existing evidence. As the interview deepened, Torres grew defensive, but when asked whether Shane had gone alone, he admitted Shane had not been alone, contrary to earlier claims. Investigators demanded clarification about who initiated the drive to the forest road, why they went at night, and the purpose of the trip. Torres fell silent and stuck to the line that nothing serious happened. Investigators then presented scattered 1987 details, witness statements about a Jeep driving slowly through the residential area, a figure near the Lindstrom's fence, and the alignment of the glove location with tire tracks. This put Torres in a position where he could no longer deny his presence in the chain of events tied to the night Kara vanished. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, Torres finally gave a statement that differed dramatically from what he had said almost 30 years earlier. He admitted that he and Shane had left downtown Spearfish that night and driven around trails leading to Crow Peak Road. He said Shane seemed anxious and agitated and wanted to drive past the residential area near the Lindstrom home, though he offered no explanation why. When asked whether Caleb Bauer was involved in that trip, Torres paused for a long time before saying Caleb might have met Shane that day, but he wasn't sure what they talked about. Pressed further, however, Torres admitted that Caleb had told them he had been noticing a girl at Dakota Mart, and that Shane seemed more interested in that than usual. This was the first time Torres ever mentioned a connection between Shane, Caleb, and a specific girl, something absent from all 1987 statements. When investigators asked Torres to clarify Caleb's role in the entire matter, he hesitated but eventually revealed that Caleb had actively talked about following someone, and that they had driven the Jeep around Kara's neighborhood multiple times in the days before her disappearance. Torres said he didn't want trouble and had only gone along for the ride, but he did not deny that Caleb was the one who first suggested the ideas. Although Torres still avoided some key questions, his new statement completely reshaped the case. For the first time in 28 years, there was a direct admission that members of the group had been in the area where Kara lived and at Crow Peak Road at the exact time she disappeared. More importantly, Torres had pointed to a prominent role for Caleb Bauer in the days leading up to the incident. Investigators documented the entire interview, marking it as a major turning point. The shift in Torres' statement, when combined with the DNA evidence and evidence locations, was strong enough to open new investigative directions and break a decades-long deadlock. After Rico Torres's new statement revealed Caleb Bauer's prominent role in the days leading up to Kara's disappearance, the cold case unit immediately shifted its focus to determining Bauer's current whereabouts. Archived records showed that he left Spearfish shortly after 1989 and had since moved through multiple states with long periods unaccounted for. A broad query through resident registration and work permit systems revealed that Caleb had been living under an alias in Mitchell, South Dakota for several recent years. He used the false name to work at a small auto repair garage on the outskirts of town, one that paid workers in cash and did not require strict identification, which allowed him to evade detection despite being on an old suspect list. Once the cold case unit confirmed Bauer's temporary residence address, they established long-term surveillance with a dedicated team. Every activity was documented to investigative standards: the routes he regularly took from home to work, the time he left the house each morning, stops along the way, the extent of his interaction with neighbors, friends, or strangers. Initial surveillance results showed that Bauer lived quietly, with minimal social contact, only buying necessities on weekends and almost never leaving the Mitchell area. He drove an old pickup truck, no longer owned a Jeep, and consistently avoided crowded places. His highly regular schedule made tailing him easy, yet it also created the impression that Bauer was deliberately keeping his life as low profile as possible to avoid attention. In addition to tracking his movements, the investigative team examined his financial activity. Because he used an alias, Bauer had no official bank accounts, but information from the garage owner showed he was paid in cash and paid rent directly to the property owner. This made it difficult for the team to gather financial data through traditional means, yet it reinforced the assessment that Bauer was intentionally avoiding leaving a paper trail. One common method in long-running investigations is collecting a suspect's trash for DNA or documentary evidence. During surveillance, the cold case unit determined that Bauer typically took his garbage to the communal dumpster every Wednesday morning. The surveillance team planned to seize the bags at the exact moment without drawing attention from him or neighbors. Once the trash bags reached the lab, technicians separated the contents, searching for items likely to retain DNA such as tissues, cigarette butts, water bottles, or drink cans. Among them, a crumpled tissue and 2 cigarette filters were identified as containing suitable epithelial cell samples for analysis. The DNA samples from Bauer's trash were extracted and stored for comparison with DNA obtained from the duct tape and gloves in the Kara Lindstrom file. Parallel to the trash DNA collection, the team reviewed Bauer's travel history using traffic camera data in Mitchell. Although the town did not have a dense camera system, several locations still recorded his vehicle passing at fixed times. This helped the cold case unit pinpoint the periods when Bauer was consistently at home, allowing them to plan tighter surveillance to gather more information without mistakes. During surveillance, the investigators also tried to identify anyone Bauer interacted with. Most were co-workers at the garage, but none knew anything about his past life. One neighbor said Bauer kept his distance and didn't like people asking questions. This matched the assessment that he was deliberately avoiding leaving traces, making the team even more convinced that living under a false name served a clear purpose. When data on his movements, finances, and daily behavior were compiled, the investigators saw that Bauer always acted in a calculated and cautious manner, completely at odds with the image of a harmless or uninvolved person. That information, combined with Torres's new statement and the DNA results from the 1987 evidence, created reasonable grounds for the cold case unit to take the next step. At this point, they needed to assess whether Bauer showed unusual avoidance behavior or signs of fear of discovery to support an arrest warrant application. Through weeks of surveillance, the collected data showed he had standard habits, but those habits reflected an effort to conceal his identity rather than a natural lifestyle. When the surveillance report was completed, the investigators combined the trash DNA results with the crime scene DNA to prepare the file for the prosecutor. With the gradually emerging intersections between old statements, new evidence, and current behavior, the cold case unit conducted a final review of all data to ensure sufficient legal grounds. Their goal was to build a solid arrest warrant application based on both forensic evidence and a years-long pattern of behavior showing that Caleb Bauer was not only involved, but played a significant role in Kara Lindstrom's disappearance. Once the arrest warrant file was completed and approved by the prosecutor, the cold case unit coordinated with local Mitchell police to execute Caleb Bauer's arrest via a traffic stop designed to avoid attention and minimize the risk of direct confrontation. Based on weeks of prior surveillance data, the team determined the time when Bauer typically drove his old pickup away from the garage at the end of each workday, following a fixed route back to his rental area. The operation was scheduled on a day with low traffic volume to ensure the stop would not raise unusual alarms among locals or allow Bauer to detect he was being followed. As Bauer drove onto County Road 13, a narrow stretch with little traffic, two unmarked police vehicles approached from behind while a marked patrol unit waited ahead. Lights were activated, forcing Bauer to slow down and pull over. He appeared surprised but not resistant when an officer approached the cab and asked for his documents. Since he was using a false name, Bauer became flustered, trying to explain the lack of valid paperwork. This opened the door for police to conduct a perimeter check per procedure. Another officer asked him to step out of the vehicle temporarily for a safety check while quickly scanning the interior. When a flashlight swept across the passenger seat, they spotted a plastic water bottle and a crushed pack of cigarettes on the floor, items that could carry DNA. Following traffic stop protocol in suspicious cases, police had Bauer stand away from the truck for additional checks. Meanwhile, another officer noted the location of items inside the cab and determined there were grounds to seize them under the approved arrest warrant. Bauer began showing irritation and repeatedly asked why he was being detained, but the officers revealed nothing beyond stating there was legal cause to search and impound the vehicle. During the more thorough search, police seized 3 items likely to contain DNA: the plastic water bottle, cigarette butts under the passenger seat, and a crumpled tissue in the door pocket. These items were sealed on scene to forensic standards. When Bauer realized this was no longer a routine traffic stop, he grew tense and kept asking if he was suspected of something. Moments later, police read the arrest warrant, stating he was being taken into custody in connection with Cold Case 87 CR 241. The change on Bauer's face was stark. He went from irritated to completely silent, no arguing, no resistance, but also no cooperation. He was handcuffed, placed in a patrol car, and transported directly to the nearest investigative facility, while the pickup was towed to an impound lot for detailed examination. At headquarters, Bauer was placed in an interview room where detectives had already prepared copies of the 1987 forensic DNA results and the DNA samples obtained from his trash surveillance. While he was held in a temporary cell, the forensic lab performed a rapid comparison of the DNA from items seized in the vehicle. Just hours later, preliminary results came back, showing that DNA from the tissue and cigarette butts matched the genetic profile the cold case unit had previously collected from Bauer's trash, and more importantly, that profile partially matched the DNA extracted from the duct tape fragment in the 1987 evidence. This was powerful confirmation. Bauer's DNA was present on evidence from the wooded scene where Kara was believed to have been approached, and his current DNA fully matched the surveillance trash samples. When the results were delivered, detectives entered the interview room. Bauer maintained a hardened demeanor, refused to answer questions, and demanded an attorney. However, that did not change the fact that he had been lawfully arrested and now faced a chain of DNA evidence tying him directly to a key position in the Kara Lindstrom case. The interview did not progress because Bauer chose silence, but the arrest itself was a decisive turning point. For the first time in 3 decades, a prime suspect in case 87 CR 241 was in custody and being questioned based on scientific evidence, not just statements or speculation. Bauer was returned to a holding cell pending further proceedings, while the investigative team immediately shifted to re-evaluating Torres's statement in light of the new DNA evidence. What they needed now was to connect all the pieces to prepare the next investigative step. After arresting Caleb Bauer and obtaining DNA results that strengthened suspicion, the cold case unit expanded interviews to individuals who knew or were connected to Bauer in the late 1980s. Among names that surfaced from old files and supplemental reports, Lydia Salazar, a casual friend of the Bauer, Hargrove, and Torres circle, was flagged as a potential witness. In 1987, Salazar had given only a brief perfunctory statement claiming she didn't know anything and was never with the group at any time relevant to Kara. However, reanalysis of the file and Torres's new statement indicated Salazar may have witnessed key events she had previously concealed. With DNA evidence already confirming Torres's involvement and cross-referenced information from Bauer, the cold case unit issued an official subpoena to Salazar's residence in Rapid City. When brought into the interview room, Salazar appeared nervous from the start, a stark contrast to the calm she displayed in 1987. Detectives placed printed forensic results in front of her: Torres's DNA on the gloves, Bauer's DNA on the duct tape, fiber analysis linking the handkerchief to Kara's clothing, and a map of where the evidence was recovered. Without threats or heavy pressure, Salazar understood the case was no longer based on speculation, but on indisputable scientific proof. When the detective opened with a direct question, "Lydia, we know he was stalking her. What did you see in November 1987?" Salazar lowered her head and avoided eye contact. After several minutes of silence, she whispered that she didn't want to keep hiding it anymore, and began revealing things never previously recorded. According to Salazar, in the weeks before Kara disappeared, Caleb Bauer became obsessed with the girl working at Dakota Mart. She said Bauer often drove his Jeep past the store area, sometimes stopping to watch from a distance. She clearly remembered multiple occasions seeing him standing in the vehicle, watching Kara leave the store after her shift. When asked why she never reported this in 1987, Salazar admitted she was afraid of both Bauer and Hargrove because they had shown impulsive and aggressive behavior when questioned. She also believed speaking up would make her a target of threats. When asked to describe the night Kara vanished, Salazar appeared confused and tense, but her account gradually became more detailed. That night, she said, she accidentally witnessed Bauer and Hargrove arguing next to the Jeep. She didn't dare approach, but clearly heard Kara's name mentioned. Salazar said that after the argument, Bauer drove the Jeep toward the Lindstrom neighborhood, while Torres took a shortcut on a dirt road to meet the group at Crow Peak Road. When asked if she knew what happened afterward, Salazar was silent for a long time before saying she only learned the rest from what Hargrove told her the next day. According to her, Hargrove said Bauer took it too far. Bauer tried to approach Kara behind her house, but Kara panicked and tried to run to the back door. During the struggle, Kara fell down the steps and was knocked unconscious. Salazar said Hargrove described Kara as unresponsive after the fall, but Bauer insisted they had to take her because he feared being reported. Salazar repeatedly emphasized that she never dared tell anyone else because she was afraid of being dragged into the case, and because at the time she didn't fully believe Hargrove's story was true. When asked to describe more specifically where Kara was taken, she stated that Hargrove said Bauer dragged Kara into the Jeep, and the group drove up forest roads north on Crow Peak Road to a narrow rock crevice that only locals would know. When confronted with the forensic data, particularly that Kara's handkerchief was found exactly in the crevice Salazar described. She broke down crying and confirmed that was where Bauer and Hargrove stopped that night. When asked if she knew the final disposal location, Salazar admitted Hargrove had spoken vaguely about leaving her deeper in the woods, near an old trail, leading to a ravine concealed by brush. But he wouldn't say exactly because he couldn't bear to look. This statement aligned significantly with the 1987 terrain data and recovered evidence locations. When the interview ended, Salazar said she couldn't stand keeping the secret all these years and that she believed Bauer was the one responsible for everything. Detectives recorded the entire statement, marking it as a breakthrough, the first time a direct witness confirmed Bauer stalked Kara for weeks, and provided a detailed description of the altercation that left Kara unconscious, along with the location where the victim's body may have been disposed of. The session concluded with the full statement documented and forwarded to the main investigative team for evaluation and preparation of the next steps in solving the case. After gathering Lydia Salazar's critical statement and cross-referencing it with forensic data, the cold case unit compiled all information to narrow the suspected area where Kara's body may have been disposed of. Soil analysis from the gloves, matching the distinctive soil of Crow Peak Road, combined with Salazar's description of a narrow rock crevice only locals know, and movement north deeper into the trail enabled the team to pinpoint a rugged section between Crow Peak Road and its intersection with Sheep Mountain Road, an area with many natural ravines rarely visited by the public. Forensic geologists were brought in to compare the 1987 soil samples with new samples from suspected locations. Analysis showed the glove soil contained a high proportion of granite fragments combined with the fine powdery soil characteristic of the eastern slope of Sheep Mountain. This reinforced the hypothesis that the disposal site lay deep within the sparse forest connecting the two roads. The cold case unit coordinated with a ground search team using topographic maps, together with Salazar's statement, to define a search grid of approximately 1.5 square kilometers that included rock crevices, old erosion channels, and dense brush never previously searched in 1987 efforts. The survey team began a grid search using probing rods, bore cameras, and subsurface anomaly detectors. Just 2 days into probing the remote wooded area, a search team discovered a patch of ground with unusual compaction between two large boulders covered by a thick layer of decayed leaves. When probing rods were inserted, the team heard a hollow sound at a depth of about 50–60 centimeters. This was immediately reported to command, and the area was sealed off for forensic excavation. The forensic team began carefully removing soil layer by layer to avoid disturbing potential evidence structure. At nearly 70 centimeters, they uncovered the first human bone fragments, a fairly intact forearm bone, lying next to a rotted cloth scrap, whose color and weave matched the fibers of the 1987 handkerchief. As excavation continued, an entire human skeleton emerged in a curled position, consistent with being placed in a narrow crevice without intentional arrangement. Forensic technicians documented the scene from multiple angles, collecting each bone fragment, cloth piece, and surrounding soil samples for analysis. The skeleton was placed in specialized containment bags and transported immediately to the state lab. Simultaneously, investigators reviewed missing person data for dental records and medical history of Kara Lindstrom to aid identification. At the lab, DNA analysis was prioritized on the femur, the bone that best preserves DNA. The extracted sample was compared to the maternal reference DNA stored from 1987. Results showed a perfect match, confirming the excavated skeleton was Kara Lindstrom. Supplemental dental examination provided another layer of confirmation: the incisor structure and a distinctive feature, a slightly misaligned right premolar, matched Kara's dental records from age 14. When the forensic team examined bone trauma, they noted two significant abnormalities: a skull fracture at the rear consistent with a hard impact from a fall or push, and a crack in the left clavicle, indicating force applied while the body was off balance. These injuries perfectly matched Salazar's description of Kara falling down steps during a struggle and losing consciousness immediately afterward. No other signs of assault appeared on the bones, reinforcing the conclusion that death likely resulted from the initial head trauma or prolonged unconsciousness in harsh conditions. With the successful recovery of the body and identity confirmation via DNA and dental records, the investigative team finally resolved the central mystery of the case, something impossible in 1987 due to the absence of a body and limited technology. Kara's skeleton, the matching injuries, and environmental traces essentially validated the accuracy of Salazar's statement and established a solid legal foundation to continue building the prosecution case against Caleb Bauer and others involved. Finding Kara's body after nearly 3 decades not only completed the picture of what happened the night she vanished, but also opened the legal path to the next phase of the investigation. The step Spearfish PD had sought for more than 28 years, but never reached. After Kara's remains were exhumed and positively identified through DNA and dental records, the cold case unit moved to the most critical phase of the entire investigation, fully reconstructing the events of the night in November 1987, when Kara Lindstrom vanished. This stage required combining all physical evidence, new witness statements, modern forensic data, and the original 1987 timeline to pinpoint every movement, action, and moment that led to Kara's death, while also explaining how the evidence ended up scattered along Crow Peak Road and in the rock crevice on Sheep Mountain Road. The investigators began by re-examining the timeline established in 1987. Kara clocked out at Dakota Mart in the evening, left through the rear parking lot exit, and started walking her usual route home. Store employees confirmed that a man, later identified as Caleb Bauer, had approached or been watching Kara shortly before she left. Neighborhood witnesses saw a green Jeep driving slowly near the Lindstrom home. Once inside the house, Kara briefly spoke with her mother, showing signs of unease about someone lurking in the backyard. Soon afterward, the family realized she was gone. The back door was ajar. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house. Based on Salazar's statement, the cold case unit determined that Bauer arrived at the rear of Kara's house exactly when she had just entered her room. Salazar said Bauer had been obsessed with Kara for weeks and frequently stalked her from a distance. On the night of the incident, he argued with Hargrove, but ultimately decided to approach Kara anyway. According to the investigators' analysis, Bauer likely circled to the backyard, taking advantage of the dim light and shadows to reach the kitchen door. When Kara heard a noise or saw a figure, she may have stepped outside or returned to the kitchen to check. A brief struggle ensued there, consistent with Salazar's account and the injuries found on the skeleton. Kara was shoved or yanked hard, causing her to fall down the steps and sustain trauma to the back of the skull, along with a fractured left clavicle. Forensic pathology determined that the skull fracture was severe enough to render Kara unconscious immediately. Without medical attention, such an injury could prove fatal within a short time due to internal bleeding or respiratory failure. This matched perfectly with Salazar's description that Kara didn't respond after the fall. Cross-referencing the injury locations and evidence descriptions, the team reconstructed the next steps. Kara unconscious, Bauer panicked and decided to move her using Hargrove's Jeep CJ7. The absence of drag marks inside the house supported the theory that Kara was carried or taken out through the back door. The items scattered along Crow Peak Road: duct tape, pieces of a black glove, Jeep tire tracks, aligned with the group stopping in a clearing to check on Kara's condition or decide what to do next. Torres's DNA on the glove fragment indicated he was involved at that stage, though his exact role, active help, or merely present, remained unclear. The duct tape bearing Bauer's DNA suggested Bauer had handled or used it, although there was no evidence Kara had been bound. The location where the bandana was found, in a narrow crevice not far away, matched the account that Kara was placed in a tight space and abandoned. When the timeline was pieced together, the cold case unit reconstructed the Jeep's route along the trail, connecting Crow Peak Road northward toward Sheep Mountain Road. The rugged terrain there provided ideal conditions for body disposal, dense brush and very little traffic. Bauer and Hargrove likely carried Kara down from the jeep, placed her between two large boulders in the crevice, and left immediately. The position of the skeleton indicated the victim was not deliberately posed, but hastily deposited while unconscious or already deceased. Forensics concluded that Kara most likely died from the head trauma or from lying unconscious in the cold without medical help. The time of death aligned with the group abandoning her that night and never returning. The lack of additional violence, no stab wounds or major broken bones, confirmed that death was not caused by a weapon, but by the injury and subsequent neglect. When all evidence was fitted into the timeline, the cold case unit produced the final picture. Bauer stalked Kara for weeks, approached the back of the house that evening, brief struggle causing Kara to lose consciousness together with Hargrove, removed Kara from the home in the Jeep first stop. Crow Peak Road continued deeper to the forested section of Sheep Mountain Road, abandoned Kara in the small crevice, never reported it to police, fled the area, and laid low for weeks afterward. The entire sequence was consistent with the chain of evidence, Salazar's testimony, DNA confirmations, and the location where the remains were recovered. After nearly 30 years, the events of the night Kara disappeared were finally assembled into a complete scientific logical sequence with sufficient legal weight to propel the case into its decisive phase. The trial for Case 87, CR 241, took place at the Lawrence County Courthouse in the early fall of 2015 and drew intense attention not only in Spearfish but across South Dakota. As the new evidence, DNA, witness statements, physical items, and the full reconstruction of the night Kara Lindstrom vanished was presented to the jury. The prosecution opened by stressing that this was not merely a decades-old cold case revived by modern technology, but a prime example of how forensic science can shatter decades of silence. The focus of the trial was Caleb Bauer, charged with murder in the first degree. Key physical evidence included Bauer's DNA on the duct tape fragment found at Crow Peak Road, DNA on tissues and cigarette butts seized from his pickup truck, and matches from surveillance trash pulls. Lydia Salazar's testimony, despite her own prosecution, played a pivotal role in establishing Bauer's motive and actions. He was obsessed with Kara, stalked her for weeks, approached the back of the house the night she disappeared, and recklessly caused the fall that left her unconscious. The skull and clavicle injuries matched her description exactly. The prosecution also outlined the disposal journey: Kara removed from the home, taken to Crow Peak Road, then deeper into Sheep Mountain Road, where the remains were ultimately found, all perfectly consistent with the evidence chain and terrain data. Bauer remained silent through most of the trial, only occasionally insisting "I didn't mean to," when his defense attorney attempted to downgrade the charge by arguing it was an accidental death. The prosecution countered forcefully that failing to seek medical help, actively removing Kara from the house, disposing of the body, and concealing his identity for nearly 3 decades constituted undeniable intent to cover up the crime, satisfying the elements of murder 1. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Caleb Bauer was convicted of murder in the first degree and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ending his 28-year run from justice. For Lydia Salazar, the prosecution acknowledged her role in finally breaking the case open with her new statement, but emphasized that her silence for decades had prevented earlier resolution. She was charged with accessory to murder and accessory to kidnapping because she knew beforehand that Bauer was stalking Kara, knew about the struggle that rendered Kara unconscious, knew the body was disposed of afterward, yet never reported it. In court, Salazar showed profound remorse and cried repeatedly while explaining that fear of retaliation had kept her quiet. The prosecution nevertheless argued that fear does not erase legal responsibility when someone deliberately delays the truth for years. The jury convicted her on reduced charges, but the judge still imposed 25 years in prison, with parole eligibility after 17 years if she demonstrated good behavior. recognizing both the harm she caused and her belated assistance in solving the case. Rico Torres faced charges of kidnapping and evidence tampering. The prosecution proved through DNA on the glove fragment and Torres's own 2015 interview statements that he was present at Crow Peak Road the night Kara disappeared, helped Bauer and Hargrove remove her from the house, and may have participated in handling the discarded evidence. Although Torres denied a leadership role and claimed he only went along without ever touching Kara, the jury found his involvement clearly exceeded merely standing by. He was sentenced to 18 years, with a minimum of 12 years to be served before parole consideration. For Shane Hargrove, the prosecution concluded he provided complicity and surveillance assistance, helping stalk Kara, supplying the vehicle, and being part of the group when Kara was taken up the mountain road. Though he did not directly cause the fatal injury, Hargrove played a critical supporting role, stalking driving Bauer in the Jeep and participating in the disposal phase. Testimony from Torres and Salazar consistently described Hargrove as the second person in the Jeep and part of the decision to take Kara to Sheep Mountain Road instead of calling the police. The jury sentenced him to 15 years, with a mandatory minimum of 10 years. After sentencing all 4 defendants, the judge concluded that Case 87, CR 241, exemplified the persistence of investigators and the advancement of forensic science, and extended profound condolences to the Lindstrom family for having to wait nearly 3 decades for the truth. In the press conference, immediately following the trial, the Cold Case Unit officially announced that File 87 CR 241 was closed, 28 years after the night Kara Lindstrom disappeared. From a case once stalled without a body, without a weapon, and without DNA, it had been solved through modern technology, relentless oversight, and Salazar's belated but crucial testimony. The outcome brought closure to a long journey filled with mistakes and dead ends, but ultimately delivered justice for Kara, a 17-year-old girl who walked out of Dakota Mart on a November evening in 1987, never imagining it would take nearly 30 years for the truth to come to light. The story of Kara Lindstrom, a 17-year-old who vanished from Spearfish, South Dakota in 1987 and whose remains were recovered only after nearly 3 decades, is not just a complex criminal file, it also reflects profound lessons for American society today, where personal safety, forensic technology, and community responsibility remain burning issues. First, Caleb Bauer's weeks-long stalking of Kara demonstrates how danger signals are often subtle and easily dismissed. In today's America, where stalking and harassment remain widespread, especially against women and teens, Kara's lesson is clear: any feeling of being watched or being followed must be taken seriously. Kara told her mother she thought someone was in the backyard, but it was treated as fleeting anxiety. That is a powerful reminder never to ignore intuition, something personal safety experts in modern America constantly emphasize. Second, the decades-long deadlock of the case highlights the investigative limitations of the 1980s, yet also proves the value of proper evidence preservation. Duct tape, gloves, and a bandana, items considered nearly useless in 1987, became the keys that reopened the entire case, thanks to modern DNA technology. This is a lesson for American law enforcement: investing in evidence storage and forensic research is not a luxury. It is the foundation of justice. Finally, Lydia Salazar's nearly 30-year silence reminds us that fear, social pressure, or a sense of "it's not my business" can turn witnesses into unwitting parts of the problem. A safe society can only exist when every individual recognizes their duty to speak up. Better late than never, because truth always needs guardians. Those details make Kara's story not merely a tragedy of the past, but a profound wake-up call for America today. Thank you for following this nearly 3-decade journey to find justice for Kara Lindstrom. If you'd like to keep exploring cases cracked by technology and persistence, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. See you in the next video, where we'll continue opening doors to truths that still remain locked.